Hello, this is Andrew from Hexacrafter again with part 2 of our assembly videos. This particular video will deal with steps 2 and 3 of the assembly of the airframe. Step 2 is the assembly of the standoffs on the bottom plate assembly, hub assembly. And then step 3 is the assembly of the arms to that assembly once it's constructed. So in order to build this portion of the airframe, you will need the 6 arms that you built in step 1. One center plate, top or bottom, it doesn't matter, they're universal. You will need 8 20mm by 3mm standoffs that are female-female. You will need 4 23mm long standoffs that are male-female and 2 23mm standoffs that are female-female and 6 6mm cap screws. So the first step is to assemble the standoffs in the bottom frame assembly per step 2. And the location of each one of those standoffs and the opposing standoff or screw is shown in step 2 of our assembly manual. I usually start by orienting the frame so that I don't make any mistakes. Basically, the frame is designed so that you have 2 battery straps on either side and a single battery strap front and rear. That's kind of a quick way to orient yourself. So I usually mount the 2 screws at the front, 2 screws at the rear first, and that helps keep me in line. So in order to do that, you need 4 of your cap screws and 4 of your 20mm standoffs. You apply a cap screw through the top of the plate and apply the 20mm standoff to the back sides of the plates. You do that at the 4 locations shown in the diagram, which are the 2 most front screws and 2 most rear screw holes on the frame assembly. Notice again, as in video 1, everything is just being done finger tight at this point. That's all the tighter I want them, so that I'm not fighting the standoff when I get further along in the construction. So you can see that there's 2 cap screws here, 2 cap screws here on the top of the bottom plate, and on the bottom you see the 4 20mm standoffs that have been installed. So next I typically install the 4 23mm male-female standoffs and the 4 female-female 20mm standoffs. These go at the halfway location between the 2 arm assemblies. So when you're looking at the frame, one arm is going to mount here with these 3 holes, another arm is going to mount here with 3 holes. It's the hole halfway between the 2 arms, this hole right here, that the standoff gets applied to. So you basically feed the male portion of the standoff through that hole and apply the 20mm standoff to the back side. You do this for the 4 locations that are equally spaced between the 2 arm assemblies. Again, they're just finger tightened at this point. So at this point we've added the 4 23mm male females going through the top of the plate to the bottom, and the 4 20mm females on the bottom. The last 2 standoffs and the last two cap screws are a midpoint of a circle of standoffs. They are applied with the cap screw going up through the bottom at the location right in front of the front battery strap. And again, the female 23 millimeter is applied to the top. Same thing is true at the rear. We apply a 6 millimeter cap screw up through the bottom to the top, directly below the battery strap, and apply the 23 millimeter female standoff to the top. So this is the completed step 2 of the assembly manual. You'll see that we have the 6 23 millimeter standoffs on the top. 4 are male-female, 2 are female-female. We have the 2 cap screws at the front and the rear, and on the bottom we have the opposing 20 millimeter female-female standoffs, and then on the bottom we only have 2 cap screws, which are here and here directly in front of the battery strap hold down. So that completes step 2. Step 3 is to install the actual arm assemblies to the bottom frame, which is our step 3 of our manual. You will need no additional hardware at this point, just the arm assemblies, and the hardware was pre-applied to them in step 1. So it's a pretty simple process. Since you're looking at this being the top of the frame assembly, and this is the top of the bottom frame, the arms are going to apply so that the motor mount is facing up and the arm is sitting on top of the bottom frame. So real quickly, the way I do this is I go through and remove all 3 screws, apply some finger tight pressure on the backside screws, and then remove the 3 screws that are on the bottom side of the arm assembly. And if you need to, you can apply a little finger tightness to the backside so that the standoff doesn't get too loose. I then typically turn the frame assembly over and lay it over top of the arm and get the holes aligned a bit. This is very similar to the motor mounts that are applied in step 1. You don't want to really tighten them all the way down initially. You just want to get them finger tight and leave an air gap of about 2 or 3 millimeters between the frame and the arms. This allows you to get the screws easily into the standoff assembly without fighting them. Once you've got all the screws fingers started and you know that you're not fighting anything anymore, just tighten them down by your fingers. You don't have to use a hex driver. I mean, if you do use a hex driver, don't drive them tight. Just get them to the point that the cap screw is actually hitting the frame assembly, and that allows just enough play that when you get further in the assembly process you don't have issues where you're fighting the fasteners. So the rest of the process is applying the rest of the 5 arms to the main assembly the same way. It's pretty quick and simple. Again, if you see that the standoff is twisting as you're loosening the screws, just apply a little pressure to the opposing screw with your finger, and that should be enough to keep it from rotating, but at the same time allow the flexibility to install it through the frame assembly. As I go through building these frames over and over and over, the one thing that I tend to get on my soapbox and lecture about is the fact that most people who have problems are trying to force the fastener into the standoff. And if you're trying to do that, then you've got some problems that are going to haunt you later. Really, in all honesty, it's about leaving the fasteners finger tight initially, so that as you assemble the frame, it goes together fairly quickly and easily. But if you tighten the standoffs really tight initially, it makes a real hard build out of it. That every single time that you work with a fastener, it wants to not align for you, and it doesn't have the flexibility to allow it to go together fairly easily. Now, every once in a while, when a fastener comes out and the standoff might move a little bit, you may need to realign it with the 2mm hex driver, as we did in step 1. You can even do that when it's through the frame assembly if you're having some trouble. It's just a matter of patience. If you get in a hurry and start fighting the fasteners, then you'll have bigger issues, but it's just all about finger tightness at this point. Once the top frame is all applied at later steps, that's when we'll go back and torque all these with the 3mm driver. I'll again indicate that I don't use Loctite on my frames. Obviously most of the other manufacturers out there are really stressing Loctite during the assembly process. Once you get the frame assembly all pretty much schematically put together and it's all at its finally assembled point, if you wish to remove the screw and add Loctite to it, feel free to do that. I have not found any issues in any of my airframes with these fasteners working their way loose, and the Loctite tends to make disassembly difficult and reassembly difficult, in that it kind of gets crusty in there and builds up. The exception to that might be the bolts out by the motor mounts themselves, with all the vibrations that potentially you could get from a motor. Sometimes you may need to apply some Loctite if you see some loosening out there, but I haven't experienced that, so at this point I still don't recommend the use of Loctite on these frames. Another thing that I obviously use is an assembly mat. It's just a, an entry mat piece of carpeting I got at a local builder's supply. I like to do that in that it keeps the frame from getting scratched during the assembly process. And that pretty much finishes step 3, which is the arms to the bottom frame. At this point, note that everything is just finger tight. It's all together at this point. You can see that the standoffs on the bottom of the bottom frame are installed and ready to accept the power plate assembly that's forthcoming. The arms are attached, motor mounts are attached, obviously, from step 1. And then the main frame assembly is ready to accept the top plate electronics and all the parts that go with that. So we'll continue this process in step 4 and step 5 in the next video. But you can see that it's really starting to come together at this point. Thank you.